Alright guys, welcome back to another 3D comic tutorial using DAZ Studio and some Photoshop. My name is John Garrett. Today I'm going to be showing you guys how to punch up your character symbols and emblems and such so they don't get covered by or lost in the shadows. So I'm going to be using the ambient method I described in my last video, but I'm not going to go into too much detail on that here to save time. So please check out that last video I did for a ton more info. For now, let's go ahead and get into this. Here in DAZ, I've already got this scene set up to use the ambient method, and what that means in a nutshell, without too much detail, is if we look at the surfaces, we can see here that my diffuse is off. Only thing that's going to be on here is opacity, and then we scroll down, ambient. So we're going to have colors and textures in the ambient channel. Everything else is turned off. What that's doing over here, making everything kind of look like a light. So that's why it looks really flat right now, but that's what we want. We want it to be flat. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and show you the texture that I used for the torso area of this supersuit. Let's go over to Photoshop. So this is it. Just a flat texture. I have this S shield here, and this is just going to go on the torso section of the supersuit, and for the rest of the supersuit it's literally just going to be this block of color. So that's it. Now back in DAZ, let's go ahead and just see the render on this and see what it looks like. Okay, that looks pretty much like what we saw in the viewport. So there's really not much to that part of it. We just have a flat base that we can use to kind of start this out. What we're going to do to flesh this out is we're going to move to what I call the shadow render in order to make the magic happen and add some depth to this image. Okay, let's move to that file. Okay, now we're here in the shadow file, and I'm trying to jump around here to save time, so I'm sorry if that's a bit disorienting, but right now that we're here, I know this file probably looking like a mistake has been made, but this is actually how it's supposed to look. So let's take a look here. If we choose our surfaces, we can again see diffuse is off. Only thing that's on is going to be our opacity and specular. So here we've got specular color at white. We've got strength all the way up to 100, glossiness all the way down to 0, specular sharpness all the way up to 100. And the magic here is made by adding the distant lights. I've got 3 distant lights here. Let's just select one of them. So you can see exactly what is being done here. We're kind of sculpting this figure with light. And we're going to take this in Photoshop, we're going to take this render, drop it on top of that very flat render we got before in order to add some depth and flesh it out. I'm going to restore that light to where it was, which you can only do if you've already memorized it. So that's just one thing to keep in mind when you get your camera and your light set the way that you want. Go ahead and memorize them by going to the flyout menu and choosing memorize item or figure or whatever you got. Anyway, with that said, let's go ahead and render and see what this looks like. Okay, there's one render here. So it looks pretty good. You can see the eyes were using the ambient channel, which is what I wanted. That looks good. But the shadows are covering up where our chest symbol would be, also covering up the belt, which I don't like. So I want to fix that. And for the belt, that's going to be simple. I'll select it. Let's go to surfaces, and I'm going to select the surface areas that I want, and I'm going to scroll down to ambient, turn it on. It's at white, which I want. Kick it all the way up to 100. We can see over here that ambient, again, it's looking like a light. Shadows are not going to cover that. That's what we need. But I can't really do that for my torso area of my super suit because I need to just target only the super emblem area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an image as a mask in order to restrict the ambient channel only to the super symbol. So let's just jump back to Photoshop. So here's the image I use. I need to turn this into a black and white, which I've done. And this is it. This is the mask. It's no more complex than this. So everywhere where it's black, that's going to block the ambient channel. And everywhere where it's white, which is going to be the red and yellow parts of the emblem, that's going to show through. So that's all we have to do for that. And I've left the lines in there because it does help to just add a semblance of line work. All right, let's get back into Daz. So in this basic suit, I'm just going to grab the torso area. You can see I've loaded this here. And I'm going to turn on Ambient. My color is white. I'm going to kick it all the way up to 100. So this looks bad in the viewport. But with the mask here, unfortunately the mask does not show in the viewport. But with that there, it's not going to render all that. It's only going to allow the ambient color to come through where that image is white. Okay, so what I'm going to do, we're just going to see another render here and check out what that looks like. All right, here's our new render. This is looking a lot better. We've got the super emblem blocked out, so we don't have any shadows on that. We got a little bit of line work there, so that's good. The belt is not covered by shadow either. So I like the look of that. Let's just take a look really quick by going to our render editor and see a quick comparison of these. All right, so there's our first render. Here's our second render. So that's quite a difference, and that's going to really help us when we composite this in Photoshop. Let's accept that. All right, now it's time to go over to Photoshop and get this thing really working. Okay, now that we're here in Photoshop, it's kind of the home stretch here. So I just want to say first that I did make some lines for this. And if you see my last video, you can see how I made those lines using the Daz cartoon renderer that's built into Daz. But I actually didn't like the way that these looked, so they don't actually appear in the final render. But if you do go and download this Photoshop file, which I'll make available, you could play around with it and see if you can get it to work. Anyway, to start with, we've got my flat render, which was the first thing we made. Now I'm going to turn on my shadow layer, and what I'm going to do is set that to color burn. And we can see that doesn't look too bad. Usually color burn is my first go-to, but you can try multiply linear burn as well. But this is the one where I did make it with the shield and the belt blocked out. Now you can see the other one. It's a little bit more muted there. You know, it doesn't look too bad, but I'm going to show you a couple other things as well too. But first, we can see my lines are not really showing up. What I did to get those lines going is I duplicated those layers and I just set them to linear burn, and I duplicated them a couple times to get those lines a bit richer, and then I did use a layer mask to just hide everything else so they only showed up in the shield. So we've got our lines there. What I'm going to do is just turn on my background. I just made a quick background. There's nothing super special. Let's see, I put a couple of lines around a belt there. Put that logo on, texture overlay. All right, so that's the final image, but I just want to show you guys how it looks without the ambient mask. So this is without the block out of the S shield. And that's on color burn. I mean, that looks okay. So here's with the ambient mask. Everything's on multiply now. Everything got a little bit darker and a little bit desaturated. I don't care that much for the multiply setting unless it's something that's supposed to be black or really dark. But let's try that multiply setting without the mask. I mean, now that symbol is really gone. So sometimes you just want that symbol to pop. And it doesn't have to be a symbol. It could be lights that are on your character too. And again, I've got his eyes glowing with the ambient color there. So let's just go back to how the final image looked. You can see it really pops out there, and it may not be realistic, but you know, we're making a comic here, so it doesn't really matter that much how real it is. Anyway, these characters are kind of larger than life. We don't want realistic lighting to spoil that impression. And I mean, if you remember something like Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns cover, it was number 4, you know, him versus Batman. You can kind of see the stylistic effects you can create with this. You can use this technique in a lot of ways, not only chest symbols, but you know, glowing eyes, lights, city windows at night as well. So, you know, go crazy with it, and hopefully it's a technique you can use in your own work. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Definitely shoot me a link if you use it so I can check it out. And you can click the link in the description to get a text write-up of all this at my site, and also download the Photoshop file if you want to play around with the layers. I know this went kind of fast, but my last video was really long. A couple people were telling me, sorry man, that was, you know, an hour. I don't really have time for an hour, so I really want to make sure I'm as brief as possible. And finally, I'm coming out with a course on 3D comics with even more techniques that I use. So if you're interested in more, please like and subscribe, and jump over to my site, sign up for the mailing list to be notified when it's coming out, and I'd appreciate it. So with all that said and done, I am out of here. I'll see you guys next time.